Celeste Morgan knew first class well. She had earned it. Every mile, every deal, every fight to be seen in a world that often looked away. As a black female CEO and the founder of Morgan Tech, her name was known in the tech world. She had broken barriers in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. Forbes had called her one of the most influential women globally for 3 years in a row, but on Flight 917 to Geneva, none of that mattered. She had pre-ordered her usual meal, lobster, bisque and prime steak paired with her favorite vintage red wine. It was more than food, it was tradition, a personal reminder that she belonged in spaces that had never been built for women like her. The plane lifted off without issue. Celeste settled into seat 1A, the very front, the best view, the top tier, a place she had fought to sit in, not as a guest, but as someone who had earned it. Her navy suit was perfectly tailored, her shoes polished, her curly hair neatly pulled back. She looked every bit the leader she was. The first flight attendant approached. His nod was polite but distant. His eyes barely landed on her before jumping to the white man boarding behind her. Celeste didn't react. She had seen that look before, dismissive, rehearsed, automatic. She took her seat. The leather was soft, the lights warm, the champagne chilled. But something in the air felt different. Later, when the meals were served, a new flight attendant, Becky, approached Celeste's seat with a tight-lipped smile. On her tray was a cold sandwich and a bottle of water. "We're out of your meal, ma'am," she said, not meeting Celeste's eyes. Celeste paused. "I pre-ordered last week. Lobster bisque. Steak." Becky shrugged. "The system must not have updated. Happens all the time." And just like that, she turned and walked away. Around Celeste, passengers were being served caviar, champagne, silver utensils, linen napkins. No one else seemed to have had a problem. Just her. She looked at the sandwich again. It wasn't just about bad service. It was the message. "This isn't your space. You're not like us. You can sit here, but don't expect to be treated the same." Celeste had lived her life fighting against that message. Sometimes shouted, sometimes whispered. And now, here it was again, in the form of a plastic-wrapped tray. But Celeste wasn't the type to raise her voice or make a scene. She didn't need to. She moved differently. She picked up her tablet and opened a private system connected to her company's internal protocol. She logged the incident with precision. Flight 917. Cabin crew Rebecca Whitmore. Suspected service bias. She knew what she was seeing. And she knew how to make it matter. This wasn't just about her meal. It was about the systems that allow silent discrimination to exist. Unchecked, unspoken, but deeply felt. She scanned the cabin. Other passengers, mostly white men, were being addressed by name. "Mr. Radcliffe, would you like another pour?" "Mr. Malcolm, how was the foie gras?" No one looked at Celeste. No one asked her if she needed anything else. She was the only black woman in first class and the only person left out, but she didn't flinch. She had been here before. Years. You go when a boardroom mistook her for a server. When investors asked if she was the face of her company, not the mind behind it. When she was offered seats, but not always the respect that came with them. So, no, this wasn't new. But this time she wasn't letting it slide. This time she wasn't alone, and she wasn't quiet. This time she was logging every detail. Not to complain, but to expose. Not to get revenge, but to demand better. Celeste looked forward. Beyond the curtain, the pilots flew through calm skies. Below, the world moved unaware. But up in seat 1A, a quiet storm was forming. One that would change not just this flight, but the way an entire industry viewed power, race, and belonging. And it all began with a cold sandwich. Celeste opened her tablet, her fingers gliding over the touchscreen. On it was the merger contract between Morgan Tech and a Swiss data security conglomerate. This deal wasn't just about market expansion. It was a strategic play in the global competition she had been plotting for over 2 years. She didn't need to look at the menu. Everything had been arranged in advance. And for a VIP like her, that was always guaranteed. Footsteps echoed softly behind her, measured, sharp. A female voice rang out, gentle enough to send a shiver down her spine. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Becky, and I'll be serving you during this flight." Celeste looked up, meeting the hard, pale face of the attendant, Becky Whitmore. Blonde hair neatly tied at the nape, a smile proper but insincere, and eyes that didn't bother to mask the cold judgment scanning her from head to toe. Right down to the thin gold ring on Celeste's left hand. "I believe you received my reservation from last week," Celeste said softly, but firmly enough to make anyone underestimating her hesitate. Becky blinked, then gave a slight chuckle, tilting, her head as if acknowledging her. "Yes, of course, we'll serve you as soon as the plane is stable." She turned away, but not before leaving behind a barely perceptible sneer. Celeste furrowed her brow. There was something in Becky's voice and footsteps that felt familiar, not because she knew this woman, but because she had encountered too many like her, the ones who were overly polite, yet always believed power came in only one skin color. Another attendant, a man named Daniel, passed by, bowing his head to greet 3 white passengers behind her, calling them by name. "Good afternoon, Mr. Radcliffe, Mr. Malcolm, and Mr. Clayton. It's a pleasure to serve you today." Laughter rose lightly from behind, the clinking of glasses. A deep voice spoke up. "Well, having caviar before takeoff like this flight's already promising." Celeste didn't turn her head. She didn't need to. But the chill running down her spine told her something. It had been a long time since she had so clearly seen the invisible line between first class and belonging. She lowered her tablet, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. Each soft tap was the beat of an alarm for something soon to happen. And she knew if Becky thought a meal could define who was important, this woman in seat 1A would show her exactly how wrong she was about that. Celeste Morgan gently looked up from her screen as the sound of high heels tapping lightly on the carpeted floor reached her ears. Becky Whitmore, the familiar face with just enough makeup to appear polished, but not enough to conceal her lack of goodwill, stopped beside seat 1A, holding a food tray that wasn't even covered. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we've run out of premium meals. We only have cold chicken sandwiches and water," Becky said, her tone devoid of any regret. Celeste narrowed her eyes and turned fully to face the attendant. "I pre-ordered last week. There's an email confirmation, booking reference, and even reminder texts from Stratus," she replied calmly, but with authority. Becky shrugged, the small notepad in her hand flapping loosely as if it were unimportant. Maybe the system wasn't updated. It happens all the time. She turned and walked away without a single apology, not even a glance back. In that moment, within the luxurious surroundings of first class, Celeste could no longer hear the murmurs of conversation, nor could she see the soft yellow light reflecting off the wine glasses of the other passengers. Everything faded. There was no apology, no explanation, just silence, and a cold sandwich that felt like a slap. Celeste sat still, watching Becky walk away with her head held high, shoulders straight, steps firm. That wasn't the walk of someone who'd made a mistake. That was someone confident she wouldn't be questioned. Someone who believed that Celeste, the only black woman in first class, wouldn't push back, wouldn't matter, and worse, that she didn't belong. Celeste's eyes moved slowly across the cabin. Behind her, white men relaxed in their seats, sipping champagne, laughing about crypto, the Asian market, and stocks. Conversations flowed. Glasses clinked. Not a single glance came her way. Not one person noticed the tray in front of her. Or maybe they did. And they were just used to people like her being forgotten. Another attendant, Daniel, walked by. He stopped at row 1C and 1D with a smile and a nod. "It's a pleasure to serve you, Mr. Radcliffe, Mr. Malcolm, Mr. Clayton." Another round of champagne, more hot towels, caviar. And Celeste? Nothing. No eye contact. No offer to help. No acknowledgement. She sat quietly, her meal in front of her, something that looked like it belonged in the back of the plane, not the front. And certainly not in front of a global tech CEO preparing to speak at the European Economic Forum. The tray was a message: cheap napkin, wilted lettuce, a soggy sandwich, and a half-full glass of water. No silverware, no linen, no respect. It wasn't just bad service. It was a statement. Celeste sat up straighter, her hands clasped together. She didn't touch the tray, not out of pride, but because she needed to absorb what it meant. She had to feel it, remember every detail, every dismissive glance from Becky, every laugh from the row behind her, every moment of silence from the others. 6 white men, 6 pressed suits, 6 champagne flutes raised beneath soft cabin lights, and not one of them looked at her. Not one of them asked why she, the only black woman in the cabin, was being served like she didn't belong. But Celeste knew, because she had lived this moment in different rooms her entire life. She remembered when she was 33, stepping into the boardroom of Sterling Capital. She had been invited to present a breakthrough AI security platform she'd designed herself. She arrived early, confident and prepared. Her pitch was solid, her data sharp. She was ready. But as she entered the room, one of the men didn't even look at her. Instead, he turned to the secretary and said, "Can you bring me a coffee?" Celeste didn't get upset. She smiled and calmly said, "I'll get you one, right after I present the $15 million security plan you're about to approve." The room went still, and from that day on, no one mistook her again. But people like Becky Whitmore, they never had to learn that lesson. Becky was part of a system that taught her she didn't need to be cruel, just indifferent. She didn't need to say something ugly, just nothing at all. The way she shrugged, the way she didn't apologize, the way she walked away as if Celeste's presence was unworthy of her time. That's how modern racism survives, not with slurs, but with silence. Not with hatred, but with hierarchy. And Becky wasn't the only one who believed it. Celeste glanced again at the other passengers. Mr. Radcliffe, venture capitalist. Years ago, he passed on Morgan Tech, saying the team lacked senior leadership. Mr. Malcolm, insurance analyst. He once asked in a conference Q&A if black women had the temperament to run tech firms. Mr. Clayton, finance CEO. Whispers followed him about inappropriate behavior toward a black female employee, but the company never investigated. They were all being served Michelin-level meals. Celeste, a sandwich, a symbol. She closed her eyes, not out of anger, out of exhaustion, because this wasn't about just this flight. It was about every step she had taken to climb the mountain, and still finding invisible hands pulling her back. But this time she wasn't just climbing, she was ready to bring the mountain down. No shouting, no drama, just quiet, deliberate action. But not everyone learns the hard way. Not Becky Whitmore. She was part of a generation raised to believe they belonged everywhere, without ever having to prove it. She never had to fight for her place. She never had to feel what it's like to be denied something because of the color of her skin. Becky didn't yell. She didn't use slurs. She didn't have to. It was the way she shrugged, the way she didn't say sorry. The way she walked away without a second look. That was her language, quiet, cold, still cutting like a knife. Celeste looked around again. Seat 1C, Radcliffe. Venture capitalist. The same man who passed on Morgan Tech years ago, saying she lacked senior leadership. Seat 1D, Malcolm, insurance analyst. He once stood on a stage and questioned if black women could really lead in tech. Seat 2A, Clayton, startup founder. Accused of harassing a black female employee. Nothing was ever done about it. All three sat comfortably, eating meals fit for royalty. And Celeste? She still had that cold sandwich in front of her. Her eyes slowly closed. But it wasn't anger that filled her. It was something heavier, a deep exhaustion, the kind that comes from climbing the highest mountain only to find people still trying to pull you back down. But today, she wasn't just climbing. She was going to tear the mountain down. No shouting. No scene, just action. Sharp, quiet, irreversible. She opened her phone and tapped into Morgan Tech's internal security system. It wasn't a random tool. It was designed for moments like this. Quiet injustice, Data gathering. Evidence in real time. In seconds, she pulled up the crew database connected to the airline's booking platform. Rebecca Ann Whitmore. Position: Senior Cabin Crew, Stratus Air. ID: STA9035. The file loaded, and the cracks showed instantly. 2. Past complaints for biased service. An internal note: focus on passengers who give better tips. No one called it racism, but the pattern was clear. Celeste didn't need more proof. She saved everything. Then typed a message to her executive. Assistant, Aaliyah Grant. Activate emergency audit protocol. Flight 917. Cabin crew ID STA9035. Confirm in 10 minutes. Each word was calm, but beneath it was fire. This wasn't just about Becky anymore. This was about every system that had allowed people like her to stay protected, promoted, and unchallenged. Celeste shut off her screen. She didn't look at the tray again. It didn't matter. She stared forward, toward the faint light near the cockpit. The long runway ahead. This was no longer about dinner. It was no longer about service. This was a declaration. The ESOC. Cabin lights dimmed, her body relaxed. But her mind raced. Thoughts spun like gears grinding back to life. Every little moment came rushing in. Every comment, every look. Every time she had to prove she belonged. She remembered Palo Alto. Age 26, her first real pitch. 7 white men sat in that room. Dress shirts tucked in, MacBooks glowing. She stood with a working prototype of a next-gen AI security system. Something years ahead of its time. And what was the first question they asked? Do you work in tech, or are you just the co-founder doing marketing? That moment stayed with her, because it didn't feel like a business meeting. It felt like walking into a casino where the game was already rigged, and the only seat left for her was the one nobody wanted. But she didn't fold then. And she sure wasn't folding now, but Celeste never backed down. She never ran, never shrank. And in the end, her AI security system, the one they all doubted, was the very model the Pentagon adopted 3 years later. She remembered being 34, standing on stage at a major tech conference in London. Cameras flashing, suits everywhere, and then came a question from a journalist. As the first black woman to break into the top 10 CEOs under 40, would you say your success is thanks to luck or diversity policies? Celeste didn't flinch. She looked him dead in the eye and smiled. Not a soft smile, a blade-thin smile. I think success comes when you work 3 times harder than everyone else, get doubted 10 times more, and keep walking forward like no one can stop you. Above her, the cabin lights slowly shifted from a warm yellow to a soft blue glow. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. We've just entered Canadian airspace. 8 hours to Geneva. A bell chimed. Meal service was about to begin. The new attendant, Daniel Clean, moved down the aisle with practiced efficiency. Celeste opened her eyes but didn't move. She sat calmly, still looking out the window. Outside, darkness. Inside, preparation, because another kind of battle was beginning. Not loud, not obvious, but real. At the center of it was Becky Whitmore. Becky wasn't a villain in the way people expect. She didn't curse, she didn't shout, she didn't make a scene. And that's what made her dangerous. Her racism wore a uniform. Smiled. On cue. Followed procedure. Hid behind fake professionalism and cold, practiced politeness. But the truth was clear, at least to Celeste. The system had allowed Becky to rise. No flags, no red lights, no questions, just quiet promotions while the damage went unnoticed. Because women like Celeste were too busy surviving to report every slight. Celeste knew this form of racism well. It didn't scream in meetings. It didn't call you names. It just erased you from the priority list. It called you ma'am, but never by your name. It forgot your meal, but never forgot the white man's next to you, and that's why she wouldn't stay quiet anymore. She tapped her smartwatch. The message was simple but urgent. Check crew member STA9035. Validate behavior per airline protocol. A few minutes passed. Then came the reply. Full profile accessed. 2 complaints within 12 months. One internal transfer for inappropriate conduct. No formal discipline issued. Celeste nodded slightly. The system had chosen silence again, but she wouldn't. She'd make it speak this time. As Daniel reached her row, she gave a subtle signal to stop. "I have a question, Mr. Clean," she said, her voice light, but each word sharp enough to cut through luxury and reputation alike. He leaned forward. "Yes, Miss Morgan?" She held his gaze. "When Stratus runs out of premium meals, how do you decide who still gets theirs? What's the priority?" Daniel hesitated. "Usually it's based on how early they ordered and how often they fly." "I'm a Diamond Plus member," Celeste replied. "I ordered 7 days ago. Got confirmation from the system." Her eyes never moved. His did. Daniel looked away, unsure, fumbling. It could be a system glitch, or maybe the crew had to shift priorities. Celeste didn't respond. She just gave a quiet, polite smile and turned her face away. Enough had been said, because while the others thought this was just a regular flight, Celeste Morgan was rewriting history, and this time no one would erase her. Celeste Morgan didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to stand up or call anyone out in front of the cabin. Her power wasn't in volume. It was in timing, precision, and actions no one could undo. She had learned a long time ago that real change doesn't always begin with a speech or a spotlight. Sometimes it begins with 6 quiet lines typed on a screen. She opened her phone, her fingers moving with calm control, as if she were sending a message to a friend. But what she typed would trigger something far more serious. "Activate internal audit procedure. Flight 917. Crew records required. Confirm." Just 6 lines. 6 lines that could shake an entire company. 6 lines that would force Stratus Air's top executives to stop pretending and finally face what they had ignored for years. Back in New York, her senior executive assistant, Aaliyah, Grant got the message. Aaliyah was trained not just to manage daily tasks, but to handle corporate crisis at the highest level. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. Her response came quickly. Received. Data retrieval in progress. It was the Morgan. Techway, swift, quiet, exact. While Celeste placed her phone back into her jacket pocket across the ocean, servers lit up. Passenger data, flight logs, and crew behavior reports were accessed and cross-checked by some of the most advanced security systems in the world. None of the first-class passengers around her had a clue what was unfolding. Behind her, laughter floated through the cabin. Radcliffe and Malcolm were deep in conversation about digital currency in Europe, while Clayton sipped his 3rd glass of champagne. And Becky Whitmore, still smiling her professional, practiced smile, still offering hot towels and mousse to the same few men, still never once turning around to look at Celeste. Because in her mind, Celeste had already been placed in the category of unimportant, forgettable. But Celeste was watching everything, quietly, closely. She saw how Becky leaned in when she spoke to Mr. Malcolm, how she bent just a little lower when pouring wine for Mr. Radcliffe, how her hand lingered just a second too long on Mr. Clayton's arm during a toast. It wasn't random. It was selective, calculated. It revealed who she believed mattered, and who didn't. 12 minutes. After Celeste had sent her original message, her smartwatch vibrated. The encrypted reply had arrived, along with a large PDF and 2 internal links. She opened the file. The heading read, Flight Attendant Behavior Record, Rebecca Ann Whitmore, ID, ST9035. Below it, the truth unfolded in sharp, quiet sentences. May 2023. A VIP passenger reported receiving the wrong meal 3 flights in a row. Notes of clear favoritism toward certain guests. August 2023. An internal note flagged Becky's unprofessional comments in the crew break room. November 2023. Operations requested a temporary suspension based on behavior that was damaging the airline's reputation. Each entry ended the same way. No formal disciplinary action taken. Celeste's right fist tightened slightly in her lap. Her face stayed calm, no visible emotion. But inside, a line had been crossed and she knew it. She wasn't just right. They were wrong. And even worse, they had allowed it to continue. Becky Whitmore wasn't just a single problem. She was the product of a broken system, a workplace culture that excused her behavior with phrases like, just a system glitch, probably just overwhelmed, or not enough proof to act. A culture that looked the other way when someone like Becky slipped through every layer of accountability. And now, that same culture would have to answer for it. Celeste scrolled further. The second file was still waiting to be opened, and she was far from finished. Celeste stared at the screen, now holding the complete crew list for Flight 917. 3 names stood out, crew members with repeated complaints, Becky Whitmore among them. She carefully marked each one, then pulled up a specific section from Stratus, Air's own policy guide. It was clear, any repeated bias or discriminatory behavior, even without a verbal offense, must be addressed according to airline ethics standards. This wasn't just company policy, it was their law, and today it would finally be used. She didn't smile out of pride. She smiled because something had shifted. Her silence, so often misunderstood as weakness, had become her weapon. Without a single outburst, without raising her voice, she was taking aim at a system that had failed too many for too long. She hit send. A formal investigation request was now on its way to the CEO of Stratus Air, with 3 top legal experts copied in. No speech, no public statement, no tweets. Just one clear subject line. Request internal investigation into Flight 917 crew. Urgent. Then Celeste put her phone away, closed her eyes, and leaned back in her seat. Outside the window, the sky looked peaceful, but inside that aircraft and far beyond it, a storm had already begun. And sitting in seat 1A, Celeste Morgan was the calm center of it all. Half a world away, in a Manhattan office overlooking the skyline, another woman was already in motion. Aaliyah Grant, 29 years old, Celeste's executive assistant, and trusted right hand, sat at her desk on the 42nd floor of Morgan Tech Tower. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, a habit she followed every time she locked into crisis mode. Her thick glasses reflected the soft blue glow of her screen, and the only sound in the room was the sharp rhythm of keys being tapped like a digital heartbeat. Celeste hadn't needed to explain anything. A single text, with the right phrasing, had said it all. That's how trust worked between them. Not in how much was said, but in how precisely it was acted on. Aaliyah pulled up the internal analytics dashboard and accessed a security feed connected to international aviation partners. Lines of code streamed across her screen as she began her deep dive. In under 90 seconds, the first result appeared. Rebecca Ann Whitmore, Senior Cabin Crew, Stratus Air, ID ST9035, joined in 2018, confirmed onboard Flight 917. At first glance, nothing looked unusual, but Aaliyah didn't stop there. She opened the customer feedback database and started pulling up records tied to Becky's past flights. It didn't take long before the cracks in the system started to show. February 2022, a black first-class passenger denied their pre-ordered wine, with no explanation. September 2022, 2 Asian travelers reported they were served only after every other passenger, even though they boarded early. March 2023, an Indian female entrepreneur said she pressed the call button 3 times on Flight 803, but no one ever came. Each time, the system gave the same tired excuse. Insufficient evidence to process violation. Aaliyah narrowed her eyes. She knew this pattern too well. She'd seen how people like Becky operated, always polite on the surface, always knowing how to bend just far enough to avoid breaking the rules. They didn't scream, they didn't curse, they just chose who to notice and who to ignore, and the system? It let them do it. But this time, that system had met its match. Becky never yelled. She never used slurs or outright insults. That wasn't her style. Instead, she quietly ignored the people she thought didn't matter. And somehow, the system let her keep doing it, for nearly 6 years. But Aaliyah wasn't about to let it slide. She opened the behavioral recognition tool she and Celeste had built together, a powerful system that analyzed bias using subtle cues, tone of voice, facial expressions, response time, even how differently crew interacted with passengers based on race. The results were damning. Becky's bias interaction index came back at 87.4%. Out of 36 recorded flights, there were 15 clear cases of repeated discriminatory behavior, most directed at non-white passengers. Aaliyah didn't smile. She smirked, but not out of amusement. It was a cold, sharp kind of disappointment, the coy kind that comes from seeing a pattern and knowing no one ever stopped it. She gathered the data points, encrypted them, and compiled a full report. It was clean, tight, unshakable. She sent it to Morgan Tech's internal command review inbox, a secure channel used only for high-level issues tied to brand reputation or strategic partners. In her message, she wrote one line: Systemic discriminatory behavior, Flight 917 crew. Per Celeste Morgan's request, initiate full cultural audit. She didn't stop there. Aaliyah also sent copies of the report to 3 senior executives at Stratus Air, including CEO Charles Edmonds, a longtime ally of Morgan Tech, and a man who understood that when Celeste moved, it wasn't out of anger. It was out of necessity, out of purpose, and he didn't need convincing. Less than 5 minutes later, Aaliyah's screen lit up. A confirmation. Investigation order approved. HR and legal will be at destination for immediate review. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Aaliyah leaned back in her chair, hands folded behind her head. She didn't feel relief because she knew this wasn't the end. It was the start of something bigger. Over the years, she had watched Celeste take down powerful banks, stubborn CEOs, even government officials. But she had never seen her hit the Audit Now command without a reason strong enough to burn through steel. The clock in Manhattan read 2 a.m., and while the city slept, Celeste Morgan remained wide awake in seat 1A, still calm, still composed. A few rows behind her, Becky Whitmore sat smiling in seat 2C, completely unaware that the walls around her were already beginning to crack. Celeste gave a small nod. Her face didn't shift, but in her heart, she knew. Everything that needed to be done had already been put in motion. She didn't need to confront anyone. She didn't need an audience. What came next was just confirmation. She reached up and pressed the call button. The soft ding was barely heard, but it was enough. Middle-aged flight attendant with salt and pepper hair walked down the aisle. His name tag read, Daniel Clean. He hesitated slightly as he approached, almost as if his instincts knew. This woman wasn't like the others. Celeste looked up, her voice even and clear. I'd like to ask again about the pre-ordered meal. Daniel stood tall, his hand resting lightly on the tray. Yes, ma'am, he began, but she didn't let him finish. Her words sliced clean through the air. I heard Miss Whitmore mention prioritizing passengers. What did she mean by that? Daniel froze. His eyes darted across the cabin as if searching for an exit. But there was none. Not from this. Because this wasn't just about a missed meal anymore. This was about truth. And Celeste Morgan had already set it free. This wasn't just about food anymore. Celeste's question wasn't really a question. It was a trap laid with calm precision. The kind of question meant to echo later in a boardroom or courtroom. A line you couldn't walk back from once it was spoken. Daniel stammered. I think that was a communication issue. We don't discriminate. We just consider things, like who ordered first or how often they fly. Celeste tilted her head, her gaze sharp as steel. Her voice stayed quiet but cut straight through the fluff. I'm a Diamond Plus member. I ordered my meal 7 days ago. I have the email, the booking code, everything. And somehow I'm the only one in first class not served a premium meal. Meanwhile, Miss Whitmore talks about prioritizing certain guests. If that's not discrimination, then what is it? Daniel said nothing. The silence was loud. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, even though the cabin air was cool. He didn't deny it, but he didn't have the courage to face it either. Celeste gave a slow smile. Not friendly, not forgiving, just final. No need to answer, she said softly. I understand now. Daniel dipped his head and turned away, walking faster than before, like a man trying to outrun the truth. But what he didn't realize was, Celeste already had everything she needed. She glanced at her smartwatch. A message had just come in from Aaliyah. Investigation approved. Stratus CEO signed off. HR and legal will be waiting in Geneva. Code Red Line 917 initiated. That code wasn't random. It was the highest alert level inside the airline. It meant serious risk to brand integrity. From this point forward, the crew's every action would be reviewed. Every recorded moment in the cabin would be stored, analyzed, and played back by legal teams and senior management. Anyone involved could be suspended within 24 hours, and Celeste had started that chain reaction with just one report. In the back of the cabin, Becky kept walking the aisle, smiling for the men in suits, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Every step she took, every word she spoke, every lingering glance was being captured by the airline's own cameras. AI-enhanced footage that Morgan Tech temporarily accessed as part of their VIP protection agreement. Becky didn't know that. But Celeste did. This was exactly why she didn't raise her voice when she was handed that cold sandwich. Why she didn't stand up or make a scene. She wasn't after revenge, she was after collapse. She opened her tablet again, not to browse or distract herself, but to pull up her own record with Stratus Air. It was spotless. 10 years as a Diamond Plus member. 12 first-class flights a year, every year. One of only 50 passengers invited to give feedback on premium service. She marked the stats. Every number, every detail. It was airtight. This wasn't personal, this was protocol. Because if she let this go, if she didn't stand up this time, someone like Becky would keep operating in silence. And black women like Celeste, like the ones coming after her, would keep being the ones forgotten, dismissed, erased. Not today, not from seat 1A. She had worked too hard, overcome too much, fought through too many closed doors to let someone like Becky rewrite the narrative. The plane gently shook as the pilot announced the descent. Becky walked by again. Her eyes passed over Celeste like she wasn't there. The B. Same distance. But what Becky didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the moment she looked away, Celeste had already made sure the system would be forced to look in. That silence, the one Celeste had grown used to throughout her career, wasn't staying silent anymore, not this time. As the plane touched down, the screech of the wheels on the runway didn't just mark the end of a flight. It marked the beginning of something bigger. Celeste slowly opened her eyes. Her head tilted slightly, not out of curiosity, but out of instinct. She wasn't just listening to the usual sounds, the engines winding down, the passengers breathing sighs of relief, the crew's footsteps picking up speed. She was listening for confirmation. And it came. Her smartwatch buzzed twice. Aaliyah had done it. The full behavioral report had been sent. It included everything. Video proof of Becky's biased treatment, timestamps of service delays, and photos from passengers who had quietly documented the moment Celeste's pre-ordered meal was refused. 3 minutes before the plane hit the tarmac, the final message had been delivered. Transfer file to Service Ethics Board. Execute urgently. Code Geneva 1A. As the aircraft rolled to a stop, Celeste didn't rush. She unbuckled her seatbelt with the same calm she had carried the whole flight. She stood, adjusted her blazer, and picked up her leather bag like it was just another business trip. But this wasn't just another trip, and everyone who mattered was about to find out why. She stepped into the aisle, steady, unbothered, as the passengers behind her fumbled with their bags. Near the cabin door, 2 people stood, waiting in dark suits. One was Brandon Ellis, Stratus Air's regional CEO for Europe. The other, a sharp-eyed woman from the airline's legal division. They both bowed their heads slightly as Celeste approached. "Welcome, Miss Morgan. We sincerely..." Celeste didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. "No need to apologize," she said, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. "This is just the beginning. No handshake, no small talk, no need to look back." But behind her, both executives straightened up, their faces shifting. They had read the report. They knew exactly what was coming and what it would cost. Meanwhile, at the back of the plane, the crew began to disembark through the rear exit like they always did. Becky Whitmore walked with them, her face composed, convinced her day was over. In her mind, she was already at the hotel bar, sipping a martini and laughing about the difficult woman in seat 1A. But as she neared the end of the jet bridge, 3 people stood waiting. Black suits, HR badges, crisis response team. One of them lifted a tablet. "Flight 917 crew, please report to emergency meeting room 2. Becky froze. Her eyes darted side to side, scanning her teammates' faces for answers. But none came. Not from Daniel Clean, whose blank stare offered no help. Not from anyone. No one said a word, no one was smiling anymore. The shift had begun. And Becky, she was standing dead center. At that same moment, Celeste walked calmly through Geneva Airport. VIP staff were waiting to guide her to her hotel. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Aaliyah. "They've started collecting testimonies." Celeste didn't reply. She didn't need to. She simply walked forward, like someone who already knew the outcome. Because this time, silence wasn't weakness. It was power. Whitmore had been suspended. The decision was swift. Her case would be brought before the board the very next morning. Celeste didn't reply to the message right away. She stepped into the back of a waiting black limousine. As the door shut behind her, the outside light vanished. She leaned back into the leather seat, eyes fixed straight ahead. She knew what happened on that flight wasn't just about her. It was bigger than that. It was a moment of quiet justice. No cameras, no shouting, just a shift, one that couldn't be undone. This wasn't a reaction. It was a cleansing. As her limousine disappeared from the airport's gates, red-flagged emails started lighting up screens inside Stratus Air's headquarters in Geneva. The subject line was the same in every inbox. Urgent. Incident on flight. DNU 17. Immediate board review required. Within 30 minutes, an emergency meeting had been called. Every senior leader, regional directors, legal advisors, customer service heads, and the top manager over cabin crews was ordered to attend. The meeting notice had one name attached to the complaint: Celeste Morgan, CEO, Morgan Tech. The second that name appeared, the air in the boardroom grew heavy. Celeste wasn't just another powerful executive. She was a symbol, a woman recognized by Time magazine as one of the top voices changing corporate culture in the 21st century. And now, she was at the center of a moment Stratus could no longer hide from. Charles Edmonds, the CEO of Stratus, known for pushing reform and demanding accountability, sat quietly at the head of the long conference table. In front of him sat a 23-page report labeled Behavioral Discrimination, Flight 917, Emergency Review under Global Ethics Code. Everyone's eyes turned to the main screen as Aaliyah Grant appeared through a secure connection from New York. She didn't waste time. "I won't be long," Aaliyah began. Her voice was calm, but carried weight. Her gaze locked onto the camera, steady and serious. "We're not here for apologies. Morgan Tech doesn't need nice words or empty statements. We need change. We need proof that your system doesn't quietly protect discrimination. No more excuses. No more silence." She paused, letting the words land. Then she played a clip. From the plane's security footage, Becky Whitmore standing stiffly, handing Celeste a sandwich tray with a dismissive tone. Maybe it didn't go into the system. Happens all the time. Then came the data. A table appeared on screen showing response times from the flight. White passengers, served within an average of 42 seconds. Celeste Morgan, 6 minutes and 11 seconds. Her meal denied. No explanation, no effort to fix it. A seasoned service advisor in the room furrowed his brow and leaned toward Edmonds. "We can't cover this up." "We won't." Edmonds replied without hesitation. He didn't say it because of pressure from Celeste's status. He said it because he finally saw what had been ignored too long. The truth was out. The elite experience Stratus had once taken pride in was built on outdated ideas, where elite didn't mean accomplished, but meant white, male, and familiar, and the woman in seat 1A had just drawn a bold, permanent line through that lie. As Aaliyah ended her call, Edmonds stood. He tapped the table once. "From this moment forward," he said, "every crew member from Flight 917 is suspended, and we'll be reviewing every flight tied to Rebecca Whitmore going back 24 months. The room fell silent, because everyone knew the system had been exposed, and now it would be forced to face what it tried to hide. He looked around the room, locking eyes with each person seated at the table. "We're going to issue a formal public apology to Ms. Morgan," Edmonds said firmly. "But that's not all. We'll also invite her to serve as a cultural advisor, someone who can help reshape how our crews are trained." A regional director raised an eyebrow. "You mean, you want her to rewrite our entire policy?" Edmonds didn't blink. "Not want, need. We need her insight. It's long overdue." It was a decision no one in that room expected. Yet at that moment, no one pushed back. Because everyone in that boardroom understood. If they didn't act now, Stratus wouldn't just be facing bad press. The name Stratus would be forever tied to a scandal, etched like a stain on white silk. Meanwhile, across town, Celeste Morgan sat quietly in her Geneva hotel room overlooking the still waters of Lake Léman. A cup of herbal tea gently steamed. Beside her, on the screen in front of her, an email had just been opened. "We sincerely apologize for what occurred. A full investigation is underway. It would be our honor to invite you to join our Cultural Reform Advisory Team. This is not just a request. It's a responsibility we believe only you can lead. Charles Edmonds, CEO, Stratus Air." Celeste didn't smile. Instead, she tapped, her fingers lightly against the table. 3 quiet taps. Her eyes never left the lake. What began with a cold sandwich tray had stirred something much bigger than anyone could have guessed. This wasn't just about one flight. It was about an entire industry waking up. Back at the airport, the crew from Flight 917 stepped off the plane like they had after countless long hauls, tired but casual. Becky Whitmore led them, her heels clicking rhythmically on the polished floor. Her blonde hair was still perfectly pinned, her smile perfectly placed. A mask worn so often it looked almost natural now. To Becky, the flight had been routine, sure. There'd been a testy passenger in seat 1A, but in her mind it wasn't a big deal. Just another customer being dramatic over a missing meal. A sandwich, she thought, rolling her eyes inwardly. So what? But as the crew reached the service exit, the mood changed. Waiting just ahead wasn't a typical staff debrief or hotel shuttle. It was a wall of silence, 6 people standing tall and serious beneath the bright, sterile lights. 3 wore black suits from internal security. 2 were senior HR managers wearing red-tagged ID lanyards, meaning emergency investigation. The last was a lawyer, holding a company-issued tablet and a thick folder stamped in bold, "Confidential." Ethics review. No one on the crew spoke. The chatter died instantly. The polished floors beneath them suddenly felt cold, the air heavy like a courtroom instead of a terminal hallway. Then, a woman stepped forward. Karen Dufresne, head of Global Service Culture at Stratus. Her voice was quiet but sharp, like a blade honed to perfection. "Flight 917 crew, please follow me to interview room 2. This is a mandatory session under Article 6.3 of the Global Service Ethics Code." One of the male attendants glanced at Becky, eyes wide in confusion. But Becky didn't move. Her mouth opened slightly, maybe to ask what was going on. But one look at Karen's unblinking stare and she shut it again. The moment had arrived. The list was prepared. The reports were sealed. They were no longer employees wrapping up a shift. They were now individuals under official review. The group was quietly led down a long hallway. 6 doors. 6 separate rooms. Inside each room, a camera rolling, a company supervisor seated, and a lawyer taking notes. Phones were taken away. No one was allowed help. Becky sat in her assigned chair, trying to keep her posture perfect. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her expression still calm. But inside, everything was shifting. The smile she had worn so easily for years was starting to slip. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't in control. The woman across the table didn't flinch. She opened a file and kept her gaze steady. "Ms. Whitmore, we're going to ask you a few questions regarding your conduct on Flight 917, as well as your behavior across other flights from the past 24 months. Her voice was calm but firm. "This interview is being recorded. It may be used in any internal disciplinary action, including termination, if misconduct is confirmed." Becky's throat tightened. Her lips felt dry. The investigator tapped a screen on the tablet and a video began to play. It showed Becky standing in front of Celeste Morgan's seat, saying casually, "Maybe it didn't go into the system. Happens all the time." Celeste in the video didn't look angry, just still, unshaken, quiet. "Do you remember this moment?" the woman asked. I just," Becky stammered. "Can you explain why 5 other passengers were served? Their pre-ordered meals, but the guest in 1A was not?" Becky reached for the usual excuse. "I think maybe the system malfunctioned." The investigator didn't flinch. "We checked. The order was confirmed 7 days prior and verified again at boarding. Would you like to add anything?" Becky couldn't find her voice. Her breath hitched. Her confidence unraveled. This wasn't just a warning. This was the moment she realized she was facing the very thing she never believed would touch her: real accountability. Every shrugged comment, every moment of disregard, every bias hidden under fake smiles. It had all been seen, not just in logs or emails, but in actions, on camera, in the quiet glances that had learned finally to speak up. And this time, the woman in seat 1A hadn't stayed silent. Over at Stratasair's Geneva headquarters, CEO Charles Edmonds sat alone in meeting room 1. In front of him were 3 reports from the internal investigation team. Their titles said enough: Rebecca Whitmore, proposal for indefinite suspension, systemic bias, proposal for comprehensive training, reform recommendation, appoint Celeste Morgan as independent advisor on diversity. Culture. He didn't need to read them twice. He already knew. A chapter of Stratus had just ended, not because of a press leak, not because of a scandal trending online, but because a black woman in seat 1A decided to rise, not with rage, but with quiet, unstoppable truth. Later that day, a company-wide email reached every branch of Stratasair across the globe. Its subject line was marked in red: urgent, immediate action required. It read, "Effective immediately. Employee Rebecca Whitmore is suspended from all duties. A full-scale overhaul of crew training procedures will begin today." It was signed personally by CEO Charles Edmonds, followed by something almost unheard of in the luxury airline world: a public admission. "We recognize that subtle discriminatory behaviors have gone unchallenged in our system. That ends now. This is a moment of reckoning, for acknowledgement, responsibility, and above all, change." At that very moment, in a small HR office in Geneva, Becky Whitmore sat in silence. She held a printed report in her hands, trembling. Not just because she'd been suspended, but because she was finally seeing what had been building for years. The same phrases she used so casually in office chats, the jokes, the eye rolls, the careless words. Now they weren't just gossip. They were evidence. Archived emails once passed off as humor were now being dissected by the company's AI language monitors. "Black passengers act like they're CEOs. I just brush them off. Makes it easier. Met a Michelle Obama wannabe today. Bread and water's fine." Once those words floated through inboxes like hallway jokes. Now they were markers, proof of a deeper problem. Because the truth is, this wasn't just about Becky. It was about a culture, one that didn't shout its bias. It whispered it, with a smirk, a shrug, a tray of food that never arrived, and finally someone stood up and said, "That's enough." 2 more crew members, including Daniel Cleaney, the one who dodged Celeste's question, were placed under behavioral review. Every flight log, every overlooked complaint, every time a passenger of color was ignored or accidentally skipped when they pressed the call button, was now under investigation. But the impact didn't stay inside the walls of Stratus Air. Within 24 hours, headlines were everywhere. The New York Times. Black CEO faces discrimination mid-flight. Power is no longer silent. The Guardian. One denied meal uncovers a broken system of luxury service. Forbes. Celeste Morgan. From Target Ivar. Bias to leading global service reform. The Washington Post ran a full 3-page piece in their equality section. At the center of it was a short video clip from the plane. It showed Celeste looking straight ahead and saying just one quiet line. "I understand now." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. And that one sentence echoed across the globe. Soon a movement began. Deceit way. People everywhere started sharing their own stories. Times they were dismissed. Times they were talked over. Times they were made to feel invisible because of their race, gender, or background. And at the end of each post came one powerful message. "I don't sit in seat 1A, but I deserve respect." Stratus Air's New York office was flooded with over 9,000 emails demanding change. In London, major investors submitted official requests for diversity training seminars. And back at headquarters, CEO Charles Edmonds got a personal call from the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, asking for a formal review of culture in luxury air travel. Celeste didn't hold a press conference. She didn't stand on a podium. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her actions had already spoken louder than any words could. At a small hotel conference room near Lake Geneva, Celeste sat across from 3 young women of color. They worked in hospitality. They had been ignored, dismissed, and told to smile more when disrespected. One leaned forward and asked, "How do we speak up the way you did?" Celeste shook her head, her voice calm but firm. "I didn't speak with boys," she said. "I let the system show itself, and I made sure this time it couldn't hide." Outside, the lake was calm, still as glass. But underneath, the waters had started to move. So had everything else. The ripple from seat 1A had turned into something far greater than Becky Whitmore could have ever imagined. And Celeste. She had. Never yelled, never caused a scene, never demanded attention. She didn't have to. She understood that real power doesn't come from volume. It comes from timing, and this time all it took was a cold sandwich, a cold stare, and a decision not to let it slide, because she knew deep down the issue wasn't the meal. It was the message behind it, that she didn't look like a person who belonged in first class. That service was selective. That respect was earned, not given, depending on who you were. But when she simply said, "I understand now," she cracked the illusion wide open. The silent racism, the coded language, the shoulder shrugs, the muttered office jokes like, "Black passengers act like they're CEOs." These things that once passed unchecked, they weren't secret anymore. And now the world was finally watching. Service logs that were once overlooked were now displayed in full view, on screens, in reports, in boardrooms. Old emails that had quietly slipped into archives were now pulled out as proof. All of it surfaced, because one woman chose not to yell. She simply acted. 3 days after the incident, Stratus Air held a press conference in Geneva. Media from around the world showed up. And for the first time in the airline's history, someone outside the executive team was invited to speak. That person was Celeste Morgan. She walked up to the podium wearing a simple ivory suit. No branding, no flash, just a small black bird-shaped pin near her collar, the new symbol of the Seat 1A Coalition, a group she had founded with other African women leaders to fight for fairness in luxury service. There was no teleprompter, no written statement, no PR team in the background, just Celeste holding the microphone, her voice calm and steady, Every word she spoke cut straight through the polished image the company had built for years. "I'm not here to be angry," she began, "and I'm not here to play the victim. I'm standing here for every person in seat 34F or near the back lavatory who gets treated like they don't matter because of their accent, the color of their skin, or simply because they don't know how to pronounce the wine list." She turned to look at the Stratus board members, but she didn't point fingers. She didn't name names. Instead, she let the silence carry the weight of the truth. "I'm not asking for better food," she said. "I'm asking for a system that doesn't erase me because I don't look like the typical person who sits in seat 1A. She never mentioned Becky Whitmore directly, but everyone knew. She talked about how 3 white men had their names remembered, their preferences honored, while she, one of the most accomplished women in tech, had only been referred to as the guest. She spoke about what it feels like to be seen, but never fully acknowledged. Then she stopped. Right then, the overhead lights dimmed from sterile white to a soft, warm yellow. For a moment, the room held its breath. There was nothing else to say. In the days that followed, a wave of reform began rolling through Stratus Air. Every flight attendant was required to undergo unconscious bias and equity training. A direct response line was launched for VIP passengers to report service issues, staffed by a real team, not just automated replies. And Celeste was officially appointed as a strategic advisor to help lead their redefining luxury program, an international effort to make high-end service more inclusive. Becky Whitmore, once seen as the face of elegance and efficiency, was now the example of how a quiet system of bias could run unchecked, until someone forced it to face itself. Bloomberg led with the headline, "She didn't shout, she stared down an industry and it changed." Right below it, in smaller print, it only took one line, "I understand now." That evening, Celeste refused every interview request. CNN, BBC. She turned them all down. She didn't need airtime, because the message had already spread, on its own, through the very system that once dismissed her. Back at her hotel, she stood on a quiet balcony overlooking the still waters of Lake Geneva. A young assistant rushed out with good news. Stratus shareholders were responding positively, praising her leadership. But Celeste gently raised a hand to stop him mid-sentence. "I don't need praise," she said. "I just need to know this system won't ever fall asleep again." And for her, that was the real win. The next morning, over 22,000 Stratus Air employees across the globe received an internal memo. Immediate. Suspension of employee Becky Whitmore. Company-wide service reform begins today. And just like that, Seat 1A became more than a number. It became the start of a reckoning. The announcement came with a signature, clear, direct, and impossible to ignore. CEO Charles Edmonds had personally approved it, and with it came a rare admission from a luxury airline. "We recognize that subtle discrimination has been overlooked within our system. That ends now. Stratus must not only take responsibility, but change." At the HR office in Geneva, Becky Whitmore sat in silence. Her hands clutched her own report, but the words on the page felt heavier than paper. Her face was pale, not just from the news of her suspension, but from the realization that everything she once brushed off as normal was now being called what it really was. Proof. Emails she once considered harmless jokes, now under review by the company's language monitoring system. Things she had typed without a second thought. Black passengers act like their CEOs. People of color always need extra attention. Met a Michelle Obama wannabe. Bread and water is enough. Once this kind of gossip slid through inboxes unnoticed. Now, it was evidence. Evidence of a system where racism didn't come with shouting or slurs, but with shrugs, smirks, and silence. And Becky wasn't the only one. 2 more crew members, including Daniel Clean, the attendant who dodged Celeste's questions, were placed under close review. Their past flights were reopened. Silent complaints from passengers of color, accidental service delays, and missed call buttons were now being examined one by one. But the shockwaves didn't stop at Stratus. Less than 24 hours after the flight, The story had already reached headlines around the world. The New York Times. Black CEO discriminated against in first class. Power is no longer silent. The Guardian. One denied meal exposes entire industry's bias. Forbes. Celeste Morgan. From passenger to pioneer of global service reform. Even the Washington Post ran a full 3-page spread in its social equality section. It included a short video clip, the moment Celeste looked up and simply said, "I understand now." She wasn't shouting. She wasn't lashing out. It was a quiet truth, spoken with clarity, and millions of people felt it in their bones. Soon after, the hashtag #Seat1A began trending online. Thousands of people shared their own experiences. Times they were passed over, ignored, or treated as less because of how they looked, where they were from, or how they spoke. And almost every post ended the same way. "I don't sit in seat 1A, but I still deserve respect." Stratus's New York office was flooded with over 9,000 messages from customers demanding reform. In London, 3 major investors submitted official letters calling for immediate diversity workshops, and CEO Charles Edmonds received a personal call from the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, requesting a full report on culture and equity in high-end air travel. And yet, Celeste Morgan didn't say a single word to the press. No press conferences, no social media rants, no photo ops, because she didn't have to. Her actions had already spoken louder than any speech. That same afternoon, in a small, quiet room at a hotel near Lake Geneva, Celeste sat across from 3 young women of color. They weren't reporters, they weren't executives. They were service workers, quiet fighters. People who had also been overlooked, sidelined, and told, without words, that they didn't belong. One of them looked up and asked softly, "How do we speak up like you?" Celeste didn't smile. Her tone was steady, her expression focused. "Don't speak up with words," she said. "I show the system its own reflection and make sure it can't look away." And that's exactly what she had done. From seat 1A, with 1 denied meal, with 1 cold stare, and with the calm power of someone who knew her silence would bring the system to its knees. "I let the system speak its own truth," Celeste once said, "and this time, I made sure it couldn't look away." Outside the hotel window, Lake Lehman looked calm, still as glass. But beneath that stillness, quiet waves moved. Just like the change that had started from seat 1A, a change Becky Whitmore would never forget. When Stratus Air finally launched its first-class culture reform program, making bias training mandatory, for every flight crew with 0 exceptions, Celeste was already gone. She had left Geneva 3 days earlier, flying back to the U.S. quietly. No press conference, no victory speech, no applause. She didn't need it. She never had. Celeste didn't chase headlines or awards. What she left behind wasn't a viral moment or a magazine cover. She left behind a higher standard, because real power, it doesn't always yell. Sometimes it just moves at the right time, with the right action. All it took was a call button. A calm question about a denied meal. A message sent quietly to her assistant. That was the spark. And it lit a fire under a system that had long ignored quiet injustice, just because it was dressed in silk napkins and silver cutlery. What many would have brushed off as being too sensitive or making it a big deal was actually the beginning of a quiet revolution in how luxury treated people of color. From that moment on, when a black passenger boarded a plane, whether they were a CEO, a teacher, an artist, or a mother flying first class for the first time, they wouldn't be seen as a stranger anymore, because now nobody would know who was sitting in seat 1A. It could be a founder, a billionaire, a changemaker, or it could be someone who just refused to shrink in the face of bias, even when that bias came wrapped in politeness and a white service napkin. One quiet weekend back at the Morgan Tech office, Celeste sat at her desk writing a letter. Not an email. A letter. She used blue ink on white paper, every stroke neat, like her strategies, every word intentional. But the letter wasn't for a CEO or a boardroom. It was for a 16-year-old girl in Florida, The girl had written to Celeste after reading about her in Forbes. She said her guidance counselor told her, "People like you should probably just go into service. High tech is too much." Celeste's reply was simple and powerful. "There will be people who think you don't belong in places they've never seen someone like you. Don't waste your energy on anger, just remember. You don't need to make noise to prove your worth. You just need to show up and never back down." And at the bottom of the page, Celeste added one final note. "P.S. You belong in seat 1A. If they say no, ask them who this system was really designed for." Months later, at an international summit on fairness in luxury industries, a short video was played. It was a recreation of that moment on the flight. Celeste in first class, the untouched tray, the cold sandwich. No words, just music, shot from the view of the cabin camera. That clip had already been seen more than 20 million times. The hashtag, Seat 1A. And in that silent conference room, hotel managers and airline executives watched without a word, because for the first time they understood. It was never about the food. It was about what the food represented, about how service, when built on quiet prejudice, fails everyone. It was about all the times no one pushed back, and how one woman's timing, quiet, composed, unshaken, finally made the system answer for its silence. That fall, Celeste boarded another plane. This time from Atlanta to Cape Town. She wasn't a passenger anymore. She was flying in as a keynote speaker at the Global Leadership Forum, and the world now knew what it had ignored too long. That change doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes, it just presses the call button. She didn't ask for special treatment. She didn't flash her name at the gate or request attention. But when she stepped into first class, something caught her eye. Something she hadn't seen before. There was a small nameplate resting in front of seat 1A. On it, just a few simple words. Reserved, seat of change. And below it, 3 more. We remember you. Celeste didn't say a word. She just smiled. A quiet, knowing smile. She sat down, buckled in. The plane began to move, wheels rolling forward on the tarmac. The sky above was still blue. Still, endless, but today it felt a little bigger. Because now there was finally space for those who were once made to feel like they didn't belong. A cold sandwich. A dismissive glance. A moment that seemed small. But it peeled back the layers of a system dressed in luxury but built on exclusion. Celeste Morgan didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She didn't seek revenge. She simply held up a mirror and made an empire take a long, honest look at itself, and it changed. Her story is a quiet kind of power. A reminder that you don't need to be loud to be heard. Just precise, just timely, just unshakably clear. So now, ask yourself, have you ever been overlooked in a place where you fully belonged? Did you stay silent, or did you speak with action? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your story. And if Celeste's journey made you think, if it moved something in you, hit the like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might be the one you needed all along. Sometimes, it only takes one person, sitting in the right seat, to change the whole plane.